Greetings everybody around the world. It's time once again for Ancient Aliens Radio. This is the dedicated radio show for the cast of Ancient Aliens. Here we interview authors and researchers as an ongoing investigation into the ancient alien theory. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or subscribe to the YouTube channel Ancient Aliens Radio.
So I have with me now on the line Dr. Rita Louise, author, researcher, radio host, a naturopathic doctor, an alternative medicine researcher of many different disciplines. Dr. Rita is going to talk today about her book called Man-Made, Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. So without further ado, let's bring on our guest for today.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm so excited to talk to you.
And me too, Rita. You know, I've been looking forward to this one. We kind of hooked up by, I think it was accident, by just communications. And I think we were going to meet anyway because we both had our own shows and we both had listeners recommend each other for each other's show. So it's even our listeners were going to make sure that we got together. So it's kind of funny.
I know. How exciting. And, you know, while we're on that topic, I just want to let your listeners know that You're going to be on my show, Just Energy Radio, on May 2nd.
Sure, Just Energy Radio, May 2nd. I'm glad you reminded me. I thought it was later in May. I'm terrible, I am. Yeah, so, yeah, you've got your own show there called Just Energy Radio, and I've tuned in a few times, Rita. You know, I love the people you have on. There's such a similar genre. And I wasn't aware that you actually had a book, and that's when we connected. That was great to see that, you know, and I've read your book, Rita, and we're going to get into that a little bit later, but just let's build a picture for the listeners who may not be familiar with you. I think a lot of them will, though. But yeah, let's get a bit about your background, because you're into alternative medicine, you know, and this is a really hot topic with me. My father's into that too, with, as I said to you before, hypnosis and stuff, you know, and it's always appealed to me. My fiance is actually going into naturopathy as a course now, and she's long been interested in this subject. So, you know, this is fascinating for me, and I know she's listening today, and I know there's a few naturopathic students listening in today. So please give us a little bit about your background, your career, education, your field of medicine that you do, consultations, all that, and let's build a picture for the listeners. Yeah.
Well, you know, for some reason I can just not extricate myself from the alternative world, and I'll just tell you my basic story. I mean, when I was a kid, my first love in life was archaeology and anthropology, and worked my way through the library. By the time I was 12, I was pretty much done with everything in our library. And, going to the La Brea tar pit was like, oh, it's the La Brea tar pit. It was so cool. But anyway, but when I learned that you had to really have a PhD to do anything in archaeology, I kind of put it to the side and moved on. And at that point in time, there were some TV shows. There was one, The Amazing Kreskin, who was a mentalist, and he had ESP. And I thought that was so cool. And at the same time, there was another show, and it was kind of like a murder mystery show called The Sixth Sense. And it was this college professor who had ESP, and he would use his psychic abilities to solve crimes. And I was like, wouldn't that be awesome? And so I kind of moved and started reading all the psychic books, which there were like 3 in the library before you hit the witchcraft section. And, but it's opened this door and really has become what I wanted to do in life. I wanted to be psychic. I didn't know that it would become the career that I would have, but I wanted to pursue that. And so, I mean, I studied astrology and numerology and tarot because I thought that, hang on one second. Oh, I can't, my little sound box just hit the floor. So I'm just going to take the phone off the hook. Okay. So, where was I? And so, I was studying all of this stuff because I thought for sure if I could do astrology charts, I would be psychic. That was a lie. And so, but I just kept reading, and, through the 80s, I went through the whole personal growth, self-help thing, and, just read, studied Kabbalah, studied anything I could really get my hands on. Then finally I found the Berkeley Psychic Institute and studied with them. And after being in their program for 3 weeks, I realized that I had been very psychic my whole life, but no one ever said when, when you have this experience, that is a psychic experience. And it was like, oh. And one of the things that came out of all of that was when I would work with people, we, learned how to do readings. We learned how to do some level of energy work as part of the training. But one of the things that I discovered about myself was that I was able to see inside people's bodies. And so I would have people come for a session and I would be doing energy work on them, and I'd be like, cesarean or hysterectomy, there's something going on with your liver. There's something going on over here. And their first question to me was, well, what can I do about it? And I had no answers. And so I decided to go back to school and get a degree as a naturopath so I could give them a next step, give them something they could do to resolve what was going on in their body on physical levels. I mean, obviously, if it's on emotional or spiritual levels, there's a totally different toolbox that you work with. But, if they have gallbladder disease or they have a kidney inflammation going on, there are things that you can do, nutritionally, supplementally, to aid and assist the body to heal.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating, Rita. Did you feel you were drawn to all this then? Or was this mental exploration on your part? Or did you feel like you were drawn to it? Or both?
How do I explain this? I mean, I feel like, my spirit, and I'm just going to use that and kind of like.
I think that's what I was hinting at.
I
think that's what I was hinting at, Rita. Did you feel that spiritual connection drawn to it? Like?
Would always just be like, okay, now go do this. Okay, now go do this. Well, it was interesting because when I finished at the Berkeley Psychic Institute, I mean, I was with them for 2 years, taking their basic program and then taking advanced training with them. And I moved. And so, that connection severed, obviously. And so I kept getting these little inner urgings that kept saying, go back to school, go back to school. And I'm like, I don't want to. And then I would kind of internalize, well, what should I be doing next? And I'd get, go back to school. And so, I became a Reiki master. I became a certified hypnotherapist, which I don't do hypnotherapy, just in case any of the listeners are listening.
Yeah, my dad's listening today. He's a hypnotist, and I was just telling you that before the show. And, I know that my dad did it because he was thrust into it. He had an intrigue into it. He met a hypnotist that taught him how to do it. And, he had a way of curing asthma with a high success rate. I don't personally know how it works, I just know that maybe the human body tricks itself in through the hypnosis process. I'm not too sure, it's not something I'm not very well intellectually up on, if you want to call it that. But I think it's just something that can be really applied to certain fields, I think, and certain as you say, aspects of the body, like psychosomatic.
This
maybe
is just my 2 cents. Asthma, in my observation of that disease, it's a trigger-induced event. So something will happen and the person will have an asthma attack.
Yeah, psychosomatic type thing.
Kind of. I mean, I hate saying that, but kind of. And so I could totally see where hypnotherapy could help reduce the triggers, eliminate the triggers that are activating what's going on.
Yeah, that's what I think it was doing, because my dad's not religious at all. He's spiritually enhanced, yes, but he's not follows any religion or any doctrine. But he used to get them to wear a cross because this was the method that was handed down to him through another person. It's a long story, but as they wore the cross and touched it on their skin, if they were felt like attack, they would put the cross on, press it against their skin, and the attack would either go away, but only if they had been hypnotized to feel and touch the thing. It was an enactment almost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so. And that's the beauty of alternative medicine, Rita, that you can, there's so many facets to it out there, and you do consultations as well, don't you?
I do. And I think one of the biggest things that I bring to the table is the assessment part. I have a lot of people that come that don't like medical doctors, that have seen a medical doctor, and they're saying, well, we want to do this surgery, but they're not feeling comfortable about it, or they're not those kind of people, and they really want a second opinion as to, do I really need to have the surgery done? Do I need to have it done today? Might even be a better question, because, and I'll use like a hip replacement. They might be experiencing pain in their hip and some discomfort, but on a scale of 1 to 10, it's maybe a 2 or a 3. And to me, it's not bad enough. And so we kind of talk about that because there are a number of situations where the person gets the hip replacement and they end up experiencing more pain than when they went in. But if you're a 10 and you can get it down to a 3, you're a happy camper.
Sure. I'm one of those people that I would have to feel the pain of a 9 out of 10 before I would go to a doctor. I'm really bad.
Yeah, me too. Oh no, I'm just as bad. I joke around with my husband. It's like, my arm has to be ripped off and I have to be unconscious, and then you could get me to go to the doctor.
Sure, but I think that's the thing about people that are just funny, Rita. We got so many. You got different star signs. You got different psychic traits. You got psychological traits, I should say. You got whatever way you want to genre people, like, they're just funny. There's just a whole spectrum of people on this planet. I love every one of them because I try to look at the quirky nature in everybody, and I don't like to think of people negatively, although people do piss me off sometimes. But they're a funny bunch of people on this planet, and that's the beauty of the planet. Like, we're all different, Rita. We're all different. Like.
Well, thank God we're all different.
It'd be a boring place if we were all the same, wouldn't it?
Well, it would, but if there was everybody who was all loosey-goosey and just kind of going their own way, then who would balance the checkbook? Who would do your accounting? I mean, and pay your taxes for you and fill out all that paperwork? It wouldn't be me.
Tell me about your energy perspective then, Rita, on what your, I don't want to say philosophy, because that kind of might be a bit insulting if it's what you believe to be true and it's not a philosophy, but I'm just using words here for the audience, I guess. But what's your belief or your energy perspective of your world around you? Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
No, not really.
I just, when you talk about healing with energies and what, I mean, people talk about like their intuitive healing, or the soul, or your spirituality, or sensitive to energies, or what's your perspective on the whole thing, Rita? I guess your philosophy of it.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I've seen in my work is that 80 to 90% of all illness has some kind of psycho-spiritual component. There is a negative belief, there is a trapped emotion that the person is holding on to. And over time and over repetition, because that belief will get reinforced, it kind of grows bigger and bigger, kind of like a corn, and so after a while, it actually emerges into the physical body. And so a lot of the work that I do, there's what's going on physically, but it's also helping people identify where they're stuck. Because many times we don't understand what's going on. I mean, even with some of my really advanced clients that, are very spiritual and will, do regression work on themselves and, have a lot of tools to work with, sometimes they'll get really stuck and they'll, because what comes up for them is this viewpoint, well, it's all about my mom, and that's where they think it ends. But then I'll look at them and go, well, there's this energy and it's tied to your dad, and what I'm seeing with it is this, and it's something they never really considered. And so it gives them the opportunity to have a breakthrough because it kind of, it gives them an outside perspective on what's going on with them, and then gives the body a chance to heal, because until you can get to that little nugget inside the corn, it cannot heal.
So you think people manifest these illnesses through some unconscious stuff at play in their mind, or is that a bigger part to play in the scheme of things than we give it credit? Or,
I mean, I don't think we sit there and go, oh, well, yeah, I want to get sick. I want to get sick.
I'm going to have cancer next week because if I don't get rid of this guilt, or, I know.
But many times, it's because of choices that we make. Something will happen. I'll use myself as an example. When I was growing up, I was extremely shy. Like, the thought of being here on this radio show, talking to you as candidly as I am right now, was like not even part of my world. it was not part of my world at all. And, you know, but there was a lot of emotional components tied to that, you know, like, well, people won't like me. They're not interested in what I have to say. I mean, there was a lot of very negative stuff tied to my not wanting to be out in public, you know, and to put myself out there. And I think had I held on to those beliefs and allowed them to be reinforced over and over and over through the years, that I don't think I would be as healthy as I am right now. I think I would be kind of a mess.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Tell me about your upbringing, Rita, just out of curiosity. Did you have like a good, I suppose, knowledge base there? Did your parents encourage you to go in certain directions, or were they just provide you with the knowledge that you tried to soak up? Or
my parents, I mean, one of the reasons why I worked my way through the entire archaeology and anthropology section in the library was because we were required to read a book in order to get our allowance. Yeah. And so they were very, you know, they wanted us all to go to college. I mean, I have 7 brothers and sisters, and I'm thinking, so 7 of us, so out of the 8, 7 of us have college degrees, if not advanced degrees.
Well, that has really paid off, that,
you know, so they should be very proud that way. You know, but my family, you know, my mom was like this Star Trek, sci-fi, chiller diller horror movie kind of, you know, and so that's what we grew up with. Do you remember the series The Prisoner with Patrick McGoohan? Oh my God, you gotta watch that. It's like 17 episodes, and you know, it's like from the 70s or something. And it's
I'm gonna Google this later. I'll probably look this up and have a good laugh. Patrick McGoohan and The Prisoner. You'll probably get it on YouTube.
It came out right after his Secret Agent Man time, you know, and it was kind of like came after that. But no, it makes you think. It was one of those series that it really made you think, watching what was going on, but you had to have that kind of an interest. You know, people that watch, for example, Seinfeld aren't really drawn to watching shows on the History Channel that are talking about the nature of the universe. You know, but the people that watch those shows that talk about the nature of the universe might be interested in watching The Prisoner because it was an intellectual kind of show.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I'm one of the history buffs. I don't watch. If I'm going to turn the telly on, it'll be History Channel, Discovery, and even at that, I'm selective of what I watch on that too. So, but yeah, you know, TV's different these days, though, Dr. Rita, because we got this, you know, exploratory, you know, concept of all these different. You know, we got a good few shows coming out in the last 5 to 10 years, you know, that are groundbreaking and breaking paradigms, and you wouldn't have seen them 20 years ago, Rita.
Oh, exactly. But then there are other ones that, I mean, we have one of the, you know, recorder things. So we'll just record stuff and then watch it later. And there's a new one on the Bible, which I just started watching. And, you know, my husband and I will sit there with, you know, a bowl of popcorn and see how much we can laugh at how they like totally distort reality. You know, there have been several that have come out that it's like, well, this is history. And it's like, in whose opinion? You know, like, if you're going to talk about the history of the world, you know, maybe talking about things that are coming up, like, how can you leave at this point in time, if it's a 2013 show talking about history, how can you leave out things like Göbekli Tepe?
Yeah.
How can you leave it out?
You know, I talked to Dr. Robert Schock about that Göbekli Tepe documentary that they did, and they made Göbekli Tepe into the National Geographic special on it. But you know, they just brought it down to that religious function again, and it's like they don't understand it. They can't explain it, so they just bring in the religious element, and that serves no purpose really. There may have been a religious function here, but there's also a technical community function there. It may not have been religious. There may have been an astronomical function to it, you know, and I find that at Passion's Graves in Ireland too, you know. I think the primary element, even Stonehenge, was astronomy, you know. There may have been bodies buried there in a religious function, but they were like primarily observatories first. They were primarily technical functions, and then maybe the astronomers were buried there. That's what I like to think, you know, so But I think things are changing in that respect now. There's a lot of people waking up to alternative history too, and we're going to get into some of that in the book. You just mentioned your husband there, Rita. His name is Wayne Libert. Is that pronounced properly? Liberty, sorry. It's just I've never seen that surname before. He's co-authored the book with you as well. So can you give me a little bit about his background, because he's not here today? I'm just curious because he's also wrote the book, so it was nice that you mentioned him. I wanted to just kind of, I'm just curious of the mindset.
Okay, so from my perspective, from my perspective, he puts up with me, and he is interested in ancient mysteries, UFOs. He's was in ex-military. I mean, one of the things that he really contributed, other than editing the book like 50 times, was helping me sort out, because there are myths. We're going to get into some of the myths, but there are these myths, and they come from all of these separate cultures. And it was like putting a puzzle together, trying to figure out how they fit in and integrated with each other. And so you don't know how many hours we spent just positioning things and going, well, here's this piece of narrative. And it's like, but there's this piece of narrative. And I felt like at certain points in time writing this book, kind of like a slot machine, where it has the little spinning wheels and you wait for it to come up 777. And I had these myths like rolling around in my head, and I just kept waiting for that, 777 of myth. And then I'm like, ding, 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 ding. This is how it goes together,
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Before I'm going to go into the book now, Rita, which is Man-Made, the Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. We're going to have a chat about that now. Just before I move away from spirituality, psychics, I have to mention about Edgar Cayce. You must surely be familiar with Edgar Cayce, because he is considered, he really is the world's first naturopath, as we would understand today. Would that be right? That be fair to say?
I will give him that accoutrement. I mean, one of the things about Edgar Cayce, my belief is that he was a phenomenal remote viewer. Was able to tap into, I'm going to say like the Akashic record and just basically download information. I mean, he was phenomenal that way.
Yeah, and he's also, it's a nice tie-in with the book. He also wrote about something being underneath the paws of the Sphinx, and he didn't just recommend people to be healed through potions or, ailments or whatever, although that was a large part of what he did too, and what he'd be famous for, and like the Sleeping Prophet. But he made predictions about ancient histories and cultures and myths as well. So,
Well, and he did a lot of work on Atlantis, and I mean, people really tie him to health-related things because he did a lot of work regarding health. But one of the things about working in that trance state, or even working in the psychic world, it's really about, if you ask a question, you get an answer. And so people would ask him questions about all kinds of things, and they would get an answer. God, don't you just wish he was still alive?
Well,
get more stuff.
I look back in history and I look at these key figures. You got, Einstein on a different scale as a scientist than genius, but you got Tesla, who tapped into something. You got Tesla was a pure genius, and you got Edgar Cayce being in the psychic field, and you don't get very many people like this. There was Ramayanan as well. He died at the age of 31, but his mathematics are still being explored today, and he tapped into some other source, and that kind of appeals to me, that we don't know we don't know all there is to know about the human brain and where it goes, or how we can explore our own consciousness, or can we tap into some other external, as you say, the Akashic record, Let's talk about Man-Made then, Rita. I love the book. Okay. I have a link up. I'm going to have a link up on the page, on the homepage. And I have your website linked up there as well, for people. Your website is soulhealer.com, is that correct?
I mean, I have multiple, but that's kind of like the portal to everything Rita Louise. So if you're interested in the radio show, you can access it from there. I have a trip. Can I throw this in here?
Just give yourself a few plug-ins because I want people to be able to find your book there too, Rita. Yeah.
One of the things that's happening this June is Brian Forrester, who's been on Ancient Aliens several times. Has he been on your show?
Not yet, but I'm thinking about getting him on because his name keeps popping up there, and I know Gary Evans works with him too. So I'm sure we're going to cross at some point.
I will pass your.
Please do, actually.
Handled. It's handled. How's that? Because Brian and I are good friends. And
well, I have your tour advertised on the CapricornRadio.com homepage, so people can find you there, and that links back to you. So I know people like to Google along as we're listening to the show too, Rita. So but
one of the things that's going to be very cool and very different about this tour is that we're going to be incorporating remote viewing and other intuitive techniques and doing it in a more scientific way to do some assessment, because people that come are all going to be part of this experiment, and we're going to be asking questions for people to get what they get, and there's definitely some rules, definitely some methodology that's being applied to this. For example, everyone gets a notebook. And so when you get an answer, you write it in your notebook. You don't just shout it out so that I can't go, well, yeah, what she said, because that contaminates. And we want to minimize contamination as much as possible.
Sure. The memory can play tricks too, Rita, can't you? You try to remember something that 2 hours ago and you try to make up parts that you can't really remember too well. Yeah.
But if we, for example, one of the places we're going to is Sacsayhuamán Mine, where they have the giant megalithic stones that they can't figure out how they carved them into those shapes and then much less put them in place. But there's a huge question about the dating of that site. They try to say, well, it was, 1200 AD, and it's like,
no, I'm not happy with that either. I'm not happy. I'm an engineer for primary. I've done physics with astronomy and masters of science and research in society, but predominantly I'm an engineer. That's what I do, and I'm a systems analyst. That's my specific branch of engineering. But you can see where the ancient technologies or the ancient cultures or ancient megalithic sites appeals to me. But I look at that place and it's off the charts. Like it's earthquake proof. The reason they built those polygonal angles was to make it earthquake proof. Well, we're talking like 100-ton stones, like popping them into place with like somewhere up to 12-sided. It's just insane.
It is insane. And so one of the things we're going to do is say, well, do you think it's, and I'm just kind of throwing out an example. Do you think it's 10,000 years old? Do you think it's 15,000 years old? And just, throw out dates because something will click with people, and give them some different tools to play with, but then, put out potential answers to the question. Because what I have found is that if unaided by other people in the group, when people reveal their answers, you will usually find a preponderance of people all giving the same response. So whether there's a group dynamic happening, I don't know. My feeling is that it's the answer.
Sure. Sounds fascinating. Sounds very interactive too, and that's the good thing. The tour is different, and I've looked at the actual itinerary. I like to research all my guests before they come on, and as you know, I just hooked up with Gary Evans there, and so I have several tours on the recommended guest tours on my page there, and it's called In the Footsteps of Viracocha tour, Peru tour. So.
Mm-hmm. And it's June 1st through 12th, and it's going to be a lot of fun. One of the things that I'm really looking forward to is we get to touch those elongated heads. Not just look at it through the glass, but actually get to touch them and interact with them.
I look forward to that. You got to take some pictures from me, Rita. I'll be you've just come back with a hard drive probably. So, okay, Rita, let's talk about the book because what I liked to see, and I read the book before I actually researched into your medicinal practice work type thing, and even in your book it comes true that you say you're an alternative thought enthusiast. And I guess that covers that. We just talked about that, I suppose. And, but that covers a multitude. That says what you are as a person. And, when I read that in the book, I went, that's what I am. Thank you for the label, because it's sometimes nice to have that as a description, even if it's just to yourself. But yeah, I mean, I guess you're looking at it in a different perspective. You're saying, look, let's look at the evidence. Let's look at these questions that are being propelled by people of the last recent times and going back to whatever epoch, but alternative science, alternative history versus mystery, that type of thing, and that's a very healthy perspective. And you give a lot of, I guess the thing is, you give a lot of scientific examples, historical accounts, biblical references, and you look at it in a fresh way, Rita. And I think, as you say, we've got this suppression of history, and as you say, it's nicely ordered and controlled, so maybe just kind of give us a little bit of an idea where you were going with the start of the book, Rita, just for the listeners, as your outline, where you wanted to go and what you were trying to portray the book as. Because I think that's what you try to do in the book. That's what I'm trying to tell you for the listeners. So,
and I'm just going to preface this. Some of the things that I'm going to say are going to sound conclusionary in nature, but that's the only way to really talk about it on air. In the book, we really lay out the evidence. Here, this is what we found. This is what we found, and come up with your own conclusion. I mean,
that's what I like about it, really. That's what you profess in the book, that you don't have this as your theory, your answer, your concrete proof and evidence. You're saying sometimes we feel this is our perspective, and sometimes this is what's been said, but this is where the evidence matches up. That's unique, Rita. That's very clever.
When you do intuitive work, in the general sense of the word, it's not about what I feel and it's not about what I think. It's about the energy that's coming from my client. And so I've had people that, some of the work that I do is with attached entities, has to do with ghost hunting and all the stuff, yet another one of my topics and a different book. And, and some people that will come will have this phenomena of an attached entity. They're very aware of it. To me, it is not something that I want. And we'll usually work with people to get rid of it. But if that's what they want and what they're coming to me for is to help them communicate with this thing better, I have to take my judgment out and just give them the feedback of, this is what I see, this is what I get, regardless of my personal opinion. And so that was how we wrote this book, was we're really going to try to keep our opinion out of it and just present, this is what we see, this is what we found, this is what we read.
Sure.
And share it.
Yeah, I think that's where you differ from other authors. And I suppose to have you write that with your husband and to have that natural conversational dissection of events and history, that that kind of grounds you somewhat. Maybe that's how the narrative developed. I think that's maybe something that you both feel strongly in the book, and I like to see that, I guess, that you can guide the reader, but not influence the reader. That's the key thing, I think. Let's probably just talk about some of the creation myths, because that's probably one hot topic in the book.
Actually, can I start somewhere else? Because I think it will help kind of give people a general idea of how we got into this whole thing in the first place and kind of set the stage.
You're talking biblical references?
No.
Okay. Sorry. I was just trying to be clever there. Okay.
Because one of the things that not much after starting the book, we decided that we needed to move the Bible to the side, because we didn't want to write a book proving or disproving the Bible. One of the things that we found was that the Bible supported all of the things we found, but it could have become like this lead weight of us going, well, but it doesn't say that in the Bible. And we didn't want that to be our focus. So with that said, this whole thing started with the whole 2012 thing. There were a lot of TV shows that were talking about, the Mayan prophecies, and then they would make these comments. See, it's all about TV. Well, in India, the Hindus have the same philosophy, period. And they wouldn't ever explain. And so, of course, being really interested in ancient traditions and this whole esoteric thing, I started digging into different philosophical systems, especially the ones they named on TV, to see what they had to say about, the end of the calendar, which I found out the stuff they were saying on TV was half truth. There was some truth, but it wasn't, they were very misleading. But in this process, I was starting to find flood stories. So we're all familiar with the story of Noah's Ark. I mean, I think it's really, we don't really need to explain. One of the things that I knew prior to that was that there were, at the beginning of the book, I thought there were 250 different flood narratives around the world. That number, according to one person, is 500 or 600 flood narratives from around the world. But, my cognitive brain said, well, obviously they all have to be different. If I have a flood here, my little river floods my village, that's going to be my flood story. And if we have a tidal wave, that's going to be my flood story. But after finding these stories that sounded very familiar, similar to Noah's story, in the Hindu tradition in particular, I started digging into these flood narratives. Now, with that said, I'm going to throw in a little caveat. If I have a flood at my house and it, like in the house I'm in now, my bathroom with the tub is on the second floor. And so if that overflows, and like saturates the ceiling, I'm going to have ceiling tiles all fall down and, hit my dog and knock her unconscious. And, and then I'll write that flood story down because that's my flood story. And so let's say at your house, your hot water heater blows up and, you have a case of books on the floor in the garage and it sogs up your books and now they're unsellable, and that's your flood story. And it's, Southeast Asia where they had that tsunami. That's their flood story. The people involved, the events involved, the situation involved are all going to be different. True? Okay. But when you do a survey of the flood stories around the world, what you find, I mean, this just freaking blew me away, James.
Sure. Yeah. I'm very familiar with this topic, by the way. So go on. Yeah. Just for the listeners.
But yeah. But this kind of sets up what we try to do and portray, but that there was a pious, virtuous, or righteous man who learned of an impending flood. He built a boat, an ark, dug a canoe, climbed a tree, climbed to the top of the mountain. He survived the flood with his sister, maybe his wife. There might be a brother. There might be an old man, just, this very small group of close relatives. In some of the stories, animals get on the boat or make it to the top of the mountain. And in a couple of the stories, an animal is released, not always a bird, but sometimes a bird. And that's it. Period. End of the sentence. I mean, we didn't even have one overflowing tub in the whole thing. I was blown away.
It's strange when you see such similarities across various different cultures, Rita, and because that makes you wake up and that appeals to that historical mystery, I can see why that would grab you, to any person that thinks logically or has any sort of an astute ability to break down some facts or look at complexities or, even to, people when they see it presented to them in that manner. Not everybody wants to go research it, Rita. I think that's the thing I'm trying to portray. But when somebody does see it researched and put into the presentation of the facts and they go, oh, that makes people wake up, and I have a first edition there of the Epic of Gilgamesh there. That's probably another famous one where the Babylonian tale of the flood, it's just synonymous with the Noah's story,
But where it got interesting for us, I mean, Bible, Middle East, Gilgamesh, Middle East, China, or India, still not that far away. I can understand how there would be, transmission of stories. Now, when you find it in South America, the Inca, that's where you start going, huh? And especially when the account was written by one of the, priests that were there in like the 1500s and 1600s before Christianity really took over the population.
Sure. How much do you think then Christianity has really affected our perspective of the past, Rita? I know that's a loaded question anyway, but
it's not even a loaded question. I mean, I'm just going to call a spade a spade. We are so brainwashed. in the Western
As
world.
we're speaking right now, Rita, I know the Pope has just been elected, like, and I just watched it before I came on at 8, and I still can't believe. I'm not against religion. If you want to go and be religious, that's okay. For me, I like spirituality. I woke up to spirituality. I love it. You know, I'm a spiritual person. I believe in the soul. I believe in an afterlife. I believe in reincarnation. I believe in a lot of things, like, but I don't feel the need to have a religious doctrine, like, and I still can't believe in this day and age that so many people gather around the square to watch a pope being elected who is no more better than a monarch. You know, he's sitting there with a Babylonian fish hat on his head. He sits on a throne and gets people to kiss his ring like a mafia don. I'm like, oh, what's wrong with you people? Like, now, I was subjected to Catholicism as a kid, so I'm a little bit burned. I'm a little bit burned. But I just thought that was relevant to throw in there. But yeah, I mean, you know,
but it's just interesting because if you go into India or you encounter any indigenous culture around the world, they are very clear that, the gods live in the sky and they come down to earth, and there are multiple of them, and this is what they're like. And in the Western world, it's really like, in the Western world, we have to refine our history because it's all been wiped out. And, our view of the world is contained in the book and those other books that have been identified as being okay, or maybe kind of okay, but they're, not really officially okay. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink kind of thing.
Yeah, okay, so we got the flood, we got creation myths, there's so many examples, and we got biblical references, but you have associative scientific references that, we have a new way of looking at this, Rita, I guess. We can put new fresh eyes on this now and go, look, we're not just told this is mythology anymore, because I think take the Dogon as one example. To them guys, that's their history. And I think it's insulting to call it mythology, because mythology is something that is used when we don't understand somebody's history. We just call it mythology, so it's quite muddled, Rita, it's quite a complex, muddled story, but, you address the mythology and you address the history and you say mythology versus history, but you have a different way of looking at things, Rita, creation myths and biblical references.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, one of the things that we found in the creation story, if you change it, just a little bit, because, when you start looking, I'm just trying to collect my thoughts here a second. When you look at creation stories around the world, most of them start with, there was no land, everything was in darkness, there was, water everywhere, and I'm just kind of making this very generic kind of statement. But in the Bible, that is actually the second line of Genesis. I mean, the first line says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so most people make the assumption that the earth was this thing, this solid thing. But again, we were looking for ties in mythology. In the flood story, the ties were overwhelming. And so we were looking, one of the things we did was we looked for parallel concepts, parallel pieces of the narrative. And so in the creation stories, the parallel piece of the narrative was about this dark, watery abyss kind of thing. And we said, okay, this is where the stories line up. Well, that's the core element. But in the biblical story, there's a line earlier, but that line has made everyone believe that the earth was there. And I think if you say, well, what if that assumption is wrong? Let's revisit what was going on and reevaluate this story. Because when you do, if you get rid of that sentence, or say, well, this is an introduction, like this, kind of like when you read like an RSS feed, Genesis, and it just has that little one-line sentence, It's just kind of like a little introductory remark. But when you do that and you start comparing it to what we know in modern science, you can bring in the Big Bang Theory. It fits perfectly in this whole narrative. The concept of dark matter and light matter, visible matter, fits in really well into these stories. One of the things that I found really interesting was that in the biblical narrative, on the third day, this is one of my favorite parts because I've heard a number of people make this comment, and I'm like, well, no, it is correct. But on the third day in Genesis, God creates the plants, and puts plants on the land and whatever. And then on the fourth day, he puts the sun, the moon, and the stars out in the sky. And so many people believe that the story's messed up, and that was my initial belief, was that, well, maybe someone in retelling the story, swapped those days and, because, no sunlight, no photosynthesis, no plants. It just kind of works that way. But the part that was really fascinating, we were just constantly hitting all of this stuff. One of the things that was fascinating is that when you look at mythology around the world, the plants come first, then the sun, the moon, and the stars are put in the sky. And we had a theory as to why that was. That's in the book. I'm not going to tell.
Sure. Yeah, you don't want to give too much away too, really. No, I understand that. I'm the same when I do shows, but I think the key thing, though, is, if you see something that we believe is a wrong concept, but repeatedly reenacted around the world, you got to keep waking up. And I got to say, really, you've gone into some creation myths there, and ones that I hadn't been aware of. So that was great to see that too. You've got a wealth of information. The book's very condensed. I'd say it's an average sized book, but it's condensed with so much facts, Rita, and well-researched facts too, a really long, extensive bibliography, too. And that's what you don't get in your TV productions. As you said, Rita, you go and you watch this on TV and you see something mentioned and you go, well, you go and further look it up and you find out, well, that's not maybe true, or that is true, or where are you getting that from, or whatever. But, your evidence is well researched and it's there, and it's a lovely wealth of bibliography. So, but you have gone into,
sorry, you have gone into this with the listeners just real quick.
Sure.
And it's not written in a boring academic way. But people could perceive, people could perceive it's like, they're talking about mythology, and it could just be this dry academic book.
Well, it's first to admit that I'm now an alternative history author, but if you had have asked me, and I'm going into mythology too, but if you had asked me 10 years ago about mythology, I'd have laughed in your face and I would have ridiculed you, and I just would have been off that. I wouldn't have said academic circle, but, I just wouldn't have seen any sense in it. I wouldn't have seen it. And that's from my own educational bombardment of, this is what you have to believe. This is what you're told to believe, and this is the only way, and I think we're changing nowadays. And I think the educational establishments have a lot to answer for, and I think we have to look at mythology in a different way now, Rita, and I've been guilty of that in the past. I'm first to admit that, but, I've opened up to that, and I'm like going, I've overlooked something big here, because mythology, I do believe now, has a core of truth. Now, how big that core of truth is, Rita, I think that's probably what your book does. It reveals a bigger core of truth that we're actually aware of,
Well, and one of the things that we came out of it believing, because our beliefs changed, trust me, through this whole process, because there's what we thought, and then there's where the research took us, which maybe was not the same place. But one of the things we walked out of it with was, if everybody around the planet is talking about it, and they all have these same themes, like the flood story, like the sun, the moon, and the stars being placed in the sky after the plants, and they're a concept of a golden age. There were just, these concepts that were portrayed over and over and over again around the world. It says to me there's something deeper, there's something older, there's something more core, and people are like, oh, well, it's, I can't think of the word, archetypes. And I'm like,
sure,
no,
archetype.
No.
But this doesn't work anymore, does it? This calling things mythology when you don't understand it. That worked 20 years ago, and it worked long before that, and things changed when the internet came out. People still don't realize this. Like, the internet's just changed everything, It researches at people's fingertips now. You can go and research anything, and, even travel around the globe. You can get on a plane and be anywhere that you want now, and people can go and see these things for themselves, I guess the other thing to point out, is that when you portray these gods with a capital G and God with a capital G and gods with a small g, as Giorgio Tsoukalos would say, and these creator gods, these guys don't seem godlike, Rita. They seem the furthest concept of a god you can find. And I know this from my Babylonian research, because I just think these guys are fascinating. And I don't think I agree with some of their attributes, but personal attributes. But you've got like a god for irrigation and a god for agriculture, and it's like they read like an executive elite of a corporation, as you say. Like, these they're not gods, are they? They're not what we would typically typify a god to be.
Well, one of the things that I enjoyed, in this research is, our understanding, our image of God is that God is kind and loving, and, he gets mad at us sometimes, and he blows up cities like Sodom and Gomorrah. That just happens. But you read this mythology, and they're anything but kind and loving. They're constantly in these power struggles with each other, and, this wasn't included in the book, but there are these stories, well, not really, stories. I mean, you hear of stories of like Zeus having sex with human women, like Hercules, as an example, was a byproduct of, he's a demigod, half god, half man, human. So that's already bad enough. But then there are these stories of the gods like raping each other. I mean, it's like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be God.
You're supposed to have an ideal that we're looking towards, and you're not it. So,
do as I say, not as I do.
Sure. Exactly. And I think that's what we've been force-fed for a while. But, like I say, people are waking up now, Rita, and, yeah, another thing you say is like, where's the alien toolbox? Like, that's another thing. People go, where is this? Because alien's a dirty word and people don't like to talk about it. I think that people are a bit more freer to say it these days. They're a lot more free to discuss this concept. And I think the show Ancient Aliens would have let the cat out of the bag, or let the horse bolt from the stable in that department. And I think the time was right for that show. I think there's some evidence in that, as you say, that might be needed to be followed up on or researched a bit better, but the large body of that, is, there's mysteries being answered there, and it's an interesting show, very, very interesting, and but it's changed the paradigm, but you say, you kind of joke in the book, where's the alien toolbox, and why would these guys leave their toolbox behind? I wouldn't do it as an engineer on a job. I wouldn't take sophisticated high-tech equipment and just throw it around after me after I've done a job. I wouldn't do it today. Why are we supposed to think they did it? But that's the archaeological mindset, I guess, Rita.
But even if you look at the archaeological record, one of the things that they don't talk about, like speaking about human evolution and the missing link or whatever, is that Lucy, that was found by Louis Leakey. I mean, that still is one of the fullest skeletons of a, early human, I'll say early human, that they ever have found, and the rest of the evidence is they have part of a cranial cavity, they have a tooth, they have a thigh bone, and we're not talking all that long ago. And the dates that we put on, which a lot of people have kind of looked at us weird, but I feel very justified with them. But I don't think they're looking back far enough. People are like, 40,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. Not far enough. They need to go further back in time. And actually, on my show, I had William Brown, who is a molecular biologist. And one of the things that he said, and if he wasn't in Hawaii, I would have kissed the man. Because one of the things that we put forward in the book was that this group of extraterrestrials actually terraformed the planet.
Sure.
And
it seems that way from the evidence. It seems that way from or the people who write the story or tell it in their scripts. It seems that they were terraforming, basically, yes.
But we don't know how many sideways looks we've gotten regarding that concept. And it's like, well, I'm not hard pressed. If you can show me evidence that that's not a true statement, I'm game. But anyway.
Sorry, Rita, just to add to that, personally, I don't see what the problem is. Why not? Why can't somebody come here and terraform? We want to go to Mars to terraform Mars back into an atmosphere. Why can't people come here and do that to us?
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing, but there are the people that are stuck with, the Sitchin people, and I hate to say that, but they're really stuck with, well, the Anunnaki came here and it was 100,000 years ago, and so they have a new Bible.
Mm-hmm. I'm not entirely sure in some of his work. It was actually I got into his work through a book called Gods of the New Millennium by Alan Alford. It would be the first out there book I ever read, I guess. That and another one about the main prophecies. But and then in that he had heavily researched Sitchin. Basically, he regurgitated so much of Sitchin, he would be a Sitchinite, as you would call it, or something like that. But I know, and I think a lot of what Sitchin did was good, but some evidences and research that he's done, it can't be verified, or they can't find the tablets that he's talking about, so.
That's because they don't exist.
Yeah, so exactly. So I'm trying to be polite.
I'm trying to be polite. But I'm going to just be flat. It's like, if you read the introduction, I know exactly what you're talking about. If you read the introduction to the Lost Book of Enki, because I read that and I go, wow, this is really convenient. It answers all the questions. If you read the introduction to that book and the last sentence of the second to last paragraph, okay, it's in the last two paragraphs, he says that this is a narrative based on the writing and rhetoric, the pacing of the writing of Sumerian texts. But there are no tablets. It was him. There are big pieces of that are actual Sumerian myths that came from cuneiform, but there are other pieces that he put in that he put together. I don't know where it came from.
I think he amalgamated some concepts that he believed. I'm not quite sure. It doesn't really, it's besides the point, but
right. It was a good read, though.
It's a very good read. Very good read. He got people's attention. But I think the thing to point out is that a lot of the Sumerian stuff is there. It's undeniable. It's something we need to wake up to, and I think a lot of people have done. I don't think it's right to go and run with other people's research when it's not very well documented and that you can't follow up. Doesn't mean it's all not true. But just, you gotta be careful in your research though, Rita, and
even using Sitchin, this is one of my big peeves about contemporary authors is they will put out material, and put it out well, this is a fact. This is how it is. This is, and there are a lot of people, and I have a lot of friends in this field, and so whatever, that use the claim that the Anunnaki, the extraterrestrials came here mining for gold. James, I searched for over a month, at least a month, 10 to 12 hours a day looking through Sumerian. I went anywhere I could go. I was looking at mines. I was looking at, historical information about ancient mines around the world. I was looking for mythological references. I was looking for anything that would say that there was gold mining happening in deep antiquity. And you know what? It was a big nothing.
Sure. I've only heard this through a radio show, but Michael Tellinger has gone into that. And he says there's loads of mines. He calls them the lost mines of Enki, or he goes, I don't know, I've never read Michael Tellinger's work, but I know he's been on a lot of shows talking about gold mines in South Africa, and he believes they're the Enki mines or associated with that Sitchin's work, and I'm not too sure, I don't, he can't reference them because the people who own the mines have closed them all up. He said there's too many mines there to exist that would actually, there's too many numbers they go too far back into antiquity. I don't know how you know any of that. I don't know how you can find that all out, and I don't know how you prove it,
Well, one of the things that we decided was not use any contemporary researchers, and we chose to use stuff that was written, like in the 1800s, because they were just much more matter of fact. And there was actually a book called The Ancient Gold Mines of Rhodesia, which is kind of in that Michael Tellinger area. And so there certainly are a lot of gold mines in that area.
Yeah, and that's the point. Let's not deny that they are there. Like, I'm just saying, like, there's nothing to say that. Look at Michael Cremo's work. I mean, Extreme Antiquity of Man. Who's to say what we didn't do that in antiquity? I'm not dispersing that away from the question of an AT presence in many moons ago. I'm just trying to follow the research and follow the facts and analyze the details. Like, let's get to the truth, but do it in the right way. So there is contemporary research out there that, people rely on sitting and head in that direction. And that probably would be a good example of that, Rita, I suppose.
And so if they're going to use material, they need to research the material, because we would not put anything in the book if we could not find a parallel and corroborating source.
Sure. Let's talk about Michael Cremo, because Michael's been on your show, hasn't he?
Yeah, and I have him coming back on. I love Michael. He's the kind of person that you would just like to strap into a chair in your dining room and just make him talk for 10 hours.
Sure.
Or more.
He's such a wealth of information, and man, he's really gone to town on this whole thing, and you cannot take away from the man's research. You really, it's astounding, it really is. And the Extreme Antiquity of Man is like a whole different genre. And I know he said to me after, I had him on my show, and he said to me afterwards, I do keep an eye on the megalithic stuff, and I very much warmed to him after the show and had a good chat with him, but such a wealth of knowledge, but he puts the case forward, and it's like, man, if it wasn't for Michael's work, we wouldn't be aware of half of this stuff, Well,
and when things pop up, on the internet or whatever that talks about, I think they found some ancient gear mechanism in Russia that they estimated as being 350 million years old. And to me, I was like, cha-ching! I mean, because that just supports my theory, of it going back further and further in time.
Eons,
So, one of the things that I didn't finish, when I was talking about that William Brown person, no, that's okay. We were just having good conversation.
I know. I'm terrible for putting in, though. I'm being erratic.
He was talking about evolution on the planet. That was the beginning of our topic. And we got into this conversation about panspermia. And his belief was that, if there was an asteroid or whatever that had cells on it that could live in space, he did agree with that. The chances of it actually hitting the Earth would be with the Earth in the proper conditions to support life and, this whole astronomical configuration that would have to happen, he thought was statistically impossible.
To capture the asteroid, to have the asteroids survive enough of it that it didn't blow up and some of it reached the planet, to have the climate ready to accept the organisms, so many variables, yes.
Right. And so his belief was that an extraterrestrial group came and actually seeded the Earth. Like I said, I just wanted to kiss the man.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for all we know, eons ago, they could have dropped something here and went away again, left it, see what developed. Yeah. Got the organisms raised up from a certain level, and again, they could have made multiple visits over eons, I do subscribe to that, even Michael will say himself that people want a simple solution and we just don't have a simple solution. You cannot expect a simple solution all the time. The story's probably a lot more complex. There is evolution going on the planet alongside contact or presence eons ago, several visits, there's many species of humans on the planet and only a few have survived. I mean, look at the little hobbit creatures that were found in Indonesia, they were unknown about, so we just don't know what's gone on in the past. So little survives, Rita.
Well, but then there's these huge jumps that happen, not just in the evolution of mankind, but evolution on the planet. Did you ever think Why do we have eyes, and how did that happen? Because we went from like little creatures with no eyes to creatures that have eyes. Or how we went from being cold-blooded to warm-blooded. How the heck did that happen? Just poof, one day there was this warm-blooded creature. I mean,
I think
you can't even wrap your mind around it.
I think there's a few of us on the planet still have the cold blood. I really do. I think there's a lot more of us out there that have the cold blood.
Well, no, those are those reptilians that live in those underground bases.
Yeah, exactly. Like, do you believe in what Icke comes out with, David Icke?
Well, it's just been in the last couple of months that, because I knew that was an area I wanted to look into, because I'll state it this way. Mythology clearly supports the concept of the underground bases. Underground realms are rampant in mythology. These underground realms being associated with some kind of half man, half fish, half man, half reptile type creature.
Sure. It's funny you mentioned this. This is where I was going with my next question here. We got the passage graves in Ireland, and people talk about them being similar to anthills. The Dogon talk about the reptilian fish-like semi-aquatic fish beings. The Nomo, yeah. Let's talk about the Nomo, because there's stories that the Dogon talk about the Nomo are horned creatures, semi-aquatic, scaly fish skin type creatures, so you couldn't make this stuff up, Rita. You couldn't set out to make this story up if you had the choice to plant it in history. You couldn't,
But the thing is, and this is where we really came from and try to just pound home in the book, is that if you go to South America, the god of the underworld is tied to watering holes, tied to fertility, and is this reptilian, serpenty, water creature. And so we find these same creatures tied with, the same attributes around the world. So it's not just the Dogon, it was the Babylonians had the Onas. Mesoamerica has Quetzalcoatl, and they all have the same attributes tied to them.
And there's something you go into in the book as well, which really drew my attention, was that you tie in this hermaphroditic, element of, it's not just that's because I'm interested in the Dogon research personally, but Laird Scranton's gonna maybe help me out with some of the Dogon mythology for my next book, but and I've gone into that hermaphroditic element of the Dogon particularly, but it seems to be linked up with Sumerian, Babylonian too, that this. And I've heard somebody on Randy's show in the chat room say, give me a link for Göbekli Tepe. One of the figurines looks hermaphroditic as well. So it seems to have this strange elements in our history as well.
Well, and I can't remember what culture the myth came from. I want to say China, but I'm not 100% on this, where they talked about, the first three originating gods were hermaphroditic, and then they split into being male and female. But when you look at the progenitor gods, usually there are 7 or 8, depending on the cosmology. They're always in these male-female pairs, so, and they're always given associations, so we have Gaia, the earth, and we have Uranus, the sky. And they're a pair, we have Nut and Geb, they're a pair. Some of them have, and this is my phonics, stepping out, please no cards and letters, but I always just joke around, ah, and e, and they have the same name, but then they change the last letter to make them be different, and it's the male and the female of, some category.
Sure. The Dogon have what do you call it? A circumcision process where they circumcise, and they believe that that's because of the hermaphroditic gods. That this is out there, this is what the Dogon believe, that when they circumcise, they're getting rid of one of their souls because the male and the female has two different souls, and that to get rid of one through circumcision is getting rid of one of the souls because they have this problem with unconscious and conscious souls at loggerheads in their such a weird complex mythology stroke history they have, like.
But that's, it's interesting that you bring up circumcision, because who in their right mind would want to do that for just because?
It freaks me out, the idea of it. I think it's the most insane thing that happens on our planet.
But I mean, most people have this impression that it's a Judeo-Christian thing. Like Jewish people get circumcised, but it's a custom and a tradition that is found around the world with very strong religious implications. It was something that I started looking up, but
I have a story to share. I shouldn't really, but I'll share it anyway.
Tell me.
It's actually a clinical thing they do in Australia as well. And the only reason I know this is my fiance was, my ex-fiance, I should say. Sorry for my fiance who's listening, but my ex-fiance, who was Australian, said to me one time when we were soon together, she goes, "Oh my God, you're not circumcised." And I just looked at her and went, "I'm Catholic. Like, what do you expect?" Like, and I went, why would I be circumcised? And apparently I didn't know at the time. Now, I was working with a lot of Australians, and I, of course, naturally asked them the question, why would you have to go, "Oh, we're all circumcised in Australia"? Apparently they do it in hospitals over there, and it's quite a regular practice. And it's not.
They do it in America. You have to really kind of
I think this is, it freaks me out. I lost the plot, and I started, you know what I did? I was working with I was in an engineering company that was Irish and Australian. Typically, I was just about 400 people working there, about 100 Aussies, and we were doing a large engineering project, and it was an Australian firm building in London, and I went round and asked them, and I said, basically, are you circumcised to all the males? And I was doing my own statistical analysis because I didn't believe it. And I'm like, and the males were looking at me going, "You're funny. Like, what's wrong with you?" And such a high percentage of them were. And I went, is your family Jewish? And he went, "No." And I went, why did they agree to that? What's wrong with you people? I just think this is insane. But,
let me just throw this out there. In Australia, there are multiple myth lines about circumcision and how they use this stick to circumcise people, and then the gods came and gave them this rock or something. I don't have it, but there's this whole evolution of circumcision in Australia. It's not.
There's a lot of anomalies over there, Rita, isn't there? There's a lot of anomalies that tie the Aborigines into other cultures.
But one of the things that I love about the Aborigines is I feel like they're a marker in time, because if you look at their culture, they have no what is considered quote unquote civilization. They have no monuments. They have no permanent structures. They have no agriculture. They have no domesticated animals, which in our culture all started 30,000-40,000 years ago. And so to me, that culture is like, if you find parallels coming out of that culture, it tells me that belief is certainly that old. So circumcision has to be where their information got cut off prior to the information getting cut off.
Sure. And another thing that Laird Scranton would talk about the Dogon as well, and their circumcision practices, that they're linked up with a Judaic Christian belief that was came out of Egypt, and they migrated across the top of North Africa. And it's weird practices like this that seem to tie these ancient cultures, and that's the beauty about the Aborigines as well, that they have a very, very rich culture, but no material based civilization. I think another practice you mentioned in the book is cranial deformation. What a weird concept to be portrayed around the globe. Sorry, go on, Rita.
I mean, Brian Forrester, my friend that I'm doing the tour with, that's one of his areas of expertise. I mean, he lives in Peru, and that's what he does, is he studies these heads. And one of the things that I find fascinating, and a point of mental inquiry is, some of them don't look like they could be human as far as the size of the skull, the volume of elongation. You can only squish your head so much to have it stretch out so far without having it squish, or you fall over.
Sure. It's to do with if you squash the brain, it's going to change the shape, but the volume stays the same. But the volume of certain, what they call cone heads of Peru, I think, the cone head skulls, the volume is so much bigger than the volume of the brain. It doesn't account. There's extra brain mass in there,
Right. And there's some other genetic abnormalities. You just need to have Brian come on and ask him about the genetic abnormalities because they're bizarre, but people are like, well, they're just human and blah, blah, blah. And my question back is, well, how much of a genetic tweak would there need to be in the human genome in order to naturally produce that elongated skull? Because the ones that he has found, for example, that have been the most bizarre, with the biggest size and whatever, have all been associated with some kind of royalty.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to send an email to Brian right after the show. How about that? I have to now. You've piqued my interest in this now. I just know, I know that Dr. Robert Schoch on Ancient Aliens talked about, a long time ago, I think it was season 1, he talked about this, cranial deformation and, just in a generic sense, that it's a worldwide phenomena and that, you also have pyramid building cropping up in places and, so, again, you got weird, strange, specific cultural practices, and we're not supposed to think they're linked in any way, Rita. What is wrong with people? Bring the common sense to the table,
Well, there's a lot of people that just want to hold on to the belief that each of these cultures sprung up with the exact same idea, no matter how painful it might have been around the world. It's like, I'm sorry, if the people in France are jumping out second-story windows, I'm not going to do it just because it's a fad there.
Sure. So, I think what I loved about your book, Rita, is that I'm read it at a time that was right for me. And what I mean by that is, you've had a lot of documentaries, a lot of media, a lot of people write stuff about all these multifaceted mysteries of the same kind of, I think all roads head back to ancient transoceanic contact between many different cultures. It wasn't separated that we think it is. And, it's gone this really convoluted answer and people are painstaking trying to figure it out. And I think you've took this convoluted perspective and you've worked back through historical references, mythological references and scientific, perspectives as well and regrouped. And you pulled the reins back in like on a horse. You just pulled the reins back in and went, hang on a minute, guys. Let's regroup, have a rethink, and assimilate the data. And you've done that in a very neat, beautiful way. You read it in the book. And that's what I loved about the book. That's why I said to you, and I love the book. That's trust me. I don't know. I sometimes I read a lot of material and I go, I'll take that out of it. But I love the book for that sheer fact alone that you regrouped and you tightened the reins in, get the perspective retuned again and back out again. So we know we're able to go again.
Well, and some of the stuff that we put out there was just common sense. And, for example, one of the things that we talked about is ochre, because we found more evidence of ochre mining on the earth versus gold mining and huge mines that went back. We put in the book 43,000 years, and that was the very conservative estimate. And we try to be extremely conservative with our dates. But there are people that estimated that they were really 90,000, if not older than that. But anyway, okay, so there's that concept of ochre. To make ochre, there are certain things that have to happen on the planet. First thing that has to happen is you have to have water. In that water, you have to have some kind of bacteria, microbiological thing, like blue-green algae, and it's anaerobic. So it takes in the carbon dioxide and it releases oxygen. And so as part of that process, one of the things that happened on the Earth was that they would release the oxygen. The oxygen would merge with, like little molecules of iron that were in the water. and then it would form quote unquote rust. We all know what rust is, and that would sink to the bottom of the water and make this layer of ochre. That's how ochre formed on the planet. Now, one of the things that we found in our research, and I'm not going to give away a whole lot, you just need to read the book, is we talk about Mars. Well, one of the things that scientists have identified is that, Mars has that red color because it has ochre on it. Okay, so given what I just said, that you need to have water, you need to have bacteria in order for the ochre to form in the first place, I don't understand why the rocket scientists can't figure out that there had to been water and at least bacterial life on Mars in the first place. I mean, I don't get that. Yeah. Do you?
I don't get a lot of science, Rita, because, I did 2 degrees and I did 2 masters, and only from my father having such a big influence on me, I went in with a wide open mind. I didn't know it at the time, but I went, you're telling me this, I don't agree with it, but I'm going to nod and say yes, and I'm going to do what I need to do for the class, but I ain't believing what you tell me. I'll believe what I see is true, and that's a very good quality to have, it can go against you too, and you can be, skeptical, but I mean, I think academia, can really have this stranglehold, really can, and it can really choke you, and it can force opinions down your throat, and I've never wanted that, and, a lot of the breakthroughs are coming through outside the scientific fields, and I mean, archaeology, history, science, and beyond, so, something you got into too, and we were touching on gold earlier, is the appreciation, and I call it the obsession with gold. That's never been explained, and I really like to see that in the book. And I don't want to speak to specifics too much and give too much away, but that woke up, that you've got these key little facts that just kind of flashing off those nerve centers in my brain, Rita. That again, that just appeals to me. Why have we got this obsession with gold? Is it because of somebody else had an obsession and they wanted it for something else, or makes you wonder?
I mean, the only thing that we could come up with based on what we found in mythology was that the gods needed it. One of the things we discovered in these stories was that it doesn't appear as if the gods really lived on the surface.
I get that impression. Yeah, I get that impression too, Rita,
and so what I think is interesting, and we were talking about Michael Cremo, so I'm going to bring his stuff in. He tells stories of miners, miles underground digging coal mines or whatever, and then finding these chambers with stuff in it. Well, maybe that's because that's where the gods were living, which again is prolific through mythology of these underground cave dwellings, whatever, so they go, well, how come we're not finding it? It's like, I don't think we're looking in the right place.
Sure. Yeah, and I don't think we're looking in the right time either, Rita, and archaeology is losing its grip, and you mentioned Göbekli Tepe in the book, and you've had Robert Schoch on, haven't you? I presume you had. I haven't heard the show if you had, but I must tune in. I've had Robert on as well, and I really liked Robert's recent book about solar outbursts, but Robert's doing a trip, and I'm trying to get on that. I actually cancelled a trip to Göbekli Tepe next week, and I'm going to try and work it in around that week that he's there, and I'm going to try and get on that. Because Robert's got all eyes on that, and I can understand why, because Robert's had this problem that, he redated the Sphinx, and they said, where's the potsherds? I'm simplifying this, but, it's a lot more gruesome than that. But they said, where's the potsherds? And, Göbekli Tepe is the potsherds now. And Robert didn't have that in his arsenal at the time. These arsenal of facts that you need to back up. And it's besides the point. And I said that to Robert on the show, and he said, thank you for that. No, he thanked me. He said, it is besides the point. And, but again, archaeology is losing its grip now, and we now have Göbekli Tepe as a 10,000 BC marker. There was somebody building complex societal structures in 10,000 BC when there were supposed to be floods, and something you go into in the book is these 3 different time frames, and I'm tying it in with a 10,000 BC date. You got this 40,000 BC date, a 10,000 BC date, and a 4,000 BC date. Now, personally, I've only concentrated on a 10,000 BC and a 4,000 BC. They're very two specific recent times. And it's and something I wasn't aware of. You tied in this 40,000 BC date in many different ways. And again, I won't go into specifics, but Sumeria, China, Egypt, and with King's Lists, and that's another epoch that people aren't looking at, Rita.
Exactly. And the only quote unquote historical evidence that we have dating the flood. I mean, because basically what we're talking about is dating the flood, and comes from the sources that we talk about in the book, but none of them dated at 12,000 BC or 10,000 or any thousand. They put it much further back in time. And there's a lot of changes that happen, during that period of time is where it was the Neolithic Revolution. It's where they started painting the caves in Lascaux. I mean, there was just so much activity happening and change happening that it's just amazing.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Lascaux there. I've read into that a lot. And there's a book called The Mind in the Cave, and it goes into the Lascaux paintings. And Graham Hancock would have gone into the evolution of consciousness, and looked into the Lascaux caves as an origin. But he respects Michael Cremo going into deep antiquity, but he's concentrating on, relatively recent times and looking for Atlantis and that. And, it's that whole Lascaux mystery. I mean, they're so advanced, paintings. And I mean, what you call the famous guy, Pablo Picasso, stumbled out of the caves, and the reporter said, "What do you think of the art in there?" And he goes, we've invented nothing. Quote, that's what he said. We haven't invented anything. It was there already.
Wow.
And that's true. They actually mimic the acoustics of the caves as well, Rita. They're talking.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've looked into. It's what they call paleo-archaeoacoustics. Now, I've gone into archaeoacoustics for my second book, and archaeoacoustics is it's as beautiful as archaeoastronomy, because archaeoastronomy can be used to date typical structures in around the 3000. Any date really that's aligned to an astronomy. You can date the Hoover Dam with archaeoastronomy in 3,000 years, because they aligned it to a constellation that was above when they built the Hoover Dam. So archaeoastronomy can apply to anything in date and time, but it's typically used in the BC area for Stonehenge, Newgrange, typical places with that. But and equally archaeoacoustics is another beautiful, because the science perspective, because they can associate acoustics. But the Lascaux caves, they call this branch paleo-archaeoacoustics, where they hone in at this acoustics knowledge that they seem to attribute to their art. And I'll give you an example. When you see the art of a handprint in ochre or whatever it is typically painted in, you can get the sound of clapping hands echoing in the cave. And if you see a picture of a bison, and the bison is drawn in 3D, it's using the contours of the rock art, literally the rocks jutting out. They're using those as the cheekbones or the muscles of the bison. And it's typically, you can hear like a herd of bison running, so they're using the acoustics of the cave to typify the art that they're painting there. It's so advanced, Rita. It's awe-inspiring when you read into it, it's so advanced, And again, sorry, go on, yeah.
And I'm going to share this one with you. I just finished reading a book about Sumerian, Babylonian, and Assyrian law, which you probably are going, well, why would you want to read anything like that? But you would find it fascinating, see, because I think you like reading these really boring, dry books like I do. And, but what was fascinating about it was the level. I mean, when we think of the Sumerians and we think of the Babylonians, we think of, they had a couple of nice buildings, and it's kind of this loosey-goosey culture. And, the Egyptians, they really don't, identify the organization that's there. But, in order to have high levels of organization, it means that there has to be a long period of practice so that you can figure out what these systems are in order to implement them. When you say, and you read these laws, talking about, how you're going to treat a slave, if you buy a piece of property, these are the guarantees you need to offer. I mean, it goes into all of this stuff that look like modern and contemporary contracts with, clauses, if you decide before 3 days that you don't want to enter into this agreement, you can back out. I mean, with, all of the nuances that we see in contemporary law. And this is Sumerian
It's
and
complex
early
societal
Babylonian.
structure. It's complex societal.
Very complex.
It's funny you should mention it because they also, with the Akkadians, let's just say the Sumerian culture is the region and the Babylonians, Akkadians, and, these are the people that were typified in kingships in the region of Sumeria. But I get mixed up sometimes. Sometimes I'm mostly generically referred to them as Babylonian because they were the recent, but Sumerian's probably the most accurate term because it typifies the region. But the Akkadians, they had a word for archaeologists in their time, and they tried to preserve deep antiquity. Now, why would they do that? If they were only relatively recent and just, but we have this fully fledged complex societal structure at the very start, but it doesn't make sense really. It wasn't the start, it was the middle of the story, if you want to call it that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Exactly. I got another question for you, just because it just spurred me on, and seeing that I have Dr. Rita Louise into alternative medicine at the other end, do you use crystals or gemstones, or you delve into that area, or?
Wow, that was a 180.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's actually coming back. I'll tell you why, because...
Oh, okay. Well, then let me answer your question and you can come back. I used to really be into crystals, and I have a huge, or not huge, I have a pretty good size healing gemstone collection, to use for healing. But, I'm an energy girl, and so I have really stepped away from using tools and working with just straight intention and directed focus and manipulation.
Intention directed as opposed to effective tools that could kind of short. Yeah, I get that.
But sometimes I have clients, I'll just share this. Sometimes I have clients that laying stones on them is the appropriate thing. Or I'll tell them, you need to go get, a piece of carnelian because you just need it.
I'm glad you mentioned carnelian. Oh, you got my next question. This is the tie-in, Well, actually, I'm going to say lepidolite. I use lepidolite because lepidolite is actually what they use for lithium batteries. And lepidolite, I think, is mostly produced in Toltec, Aztec regions in Central America. And they crush it up to get the lithium out of it, basically. It's a purpley crystal stone, and it's partly used for erratic brains. And I'm Mr. Erratic because, you just seen with my 180-degree question, but I put it under my pillow, and I know my brain, if I'm having an erratic day or whatever, I just sleep under a bit of lepidolite, and I'm tuned in again. It restructures me and tunes me in, and, so I don't do it regularly, but if I'm having a bad day when I'm just chaotic in my mind, Richard Feynman's chaos theory, basically going at full throttle in my brain. But the Babylonians, coming back to them, this is the 180-degree, Rita. These guys used a lot of crystals and gemstones, and they wore them as pendants, and I wonder, did they have some intuitive way? Basically, they would have a cylinder seal. Now, I've researched cylinder seals quite a lot, Rita, and I should really do a book on it, but I'm getting pulled in different directions, and the engineer in me wants to understand cylinder seals, and they used a lot of carnelian, as you mentioned, lapis lazuli, calcite. They used weird. It seems to be they didn't care what the gemstone was made out of. They used diorite, some really hard stones that are very, very hard to carve. And they carved in 3D, Rita. Not only did they carve in 3D, they reverse embossed this so that if you roll this into clay in this tubular cylinder, it would leave an imprint of a story. And it's so intricate. Some of the stones are like a black and white marble, or you can't even see the image until you roll it into clay. So therefore, if you can't see the image as you're carving it, how can you carve it it's such intense engineering
But what's kind of interesting though, when you read, we were talking about the gold before. When you read Sumerian myths, there are quite a number of myths that talk about them mining lapis lazuli, and there are there are a number of stones that are referenced, of them going and mining out. They don't really say what they do with them at all. But no gold.
Sure.
None.
But well, the thing about these cylinders, they're like a little 2-inch cylinder, and I've had the pleasure of being in the British Museum. I used to go in 2 days a week, and I could tell you that place back to front. I could tell you nearly where every artifact is, like, but a real history buff that used to...
Well, you don't need to go anywhere in the world. You just need to go to the British Museum because they pretty much have everything.
They took everything, carved it up, and brought it home. Sure. But these guys have a lot of cylinder seals. I think there's 3 or 4 museums in the world have, like, pretty much most of the cylinder seals out there. But the thing is, they wore these things, and this is why I want to ask you. I mean, they wore them around the neck as a pendant, and I wonder, did they have, each king have their own type of gemstone as a pendant for the chakra or something? Was there some sort of an energy feeling for that, like?
It wouldn't surprise me because the tradition of working with stones, is even found in, like, medieval material.
Yeah, that's right. And the carnelian carnelian's used for a lot of, is it not? Going back to the Pope thing, I think it's on the papal ring, is it not? Or a pendant, or is it a staff that he uses? The scepter.
Well, that would be kind of interesting.
It's the scepter, yeah. That staff that they use, that scepter has carnelian on it.
That's still kind of interesting. I mean, if you think about it, okay, so now, like, my little sick mind is totally engaged in that one. Carnelian is a second chakra stone, which is our sex center. So why would the Pope need carnelian?
Oh, right. Sexual rituals. We're going out there all together. Wow, fascinating. It's just something else to mention, because you talked about, I'm going to go 180 again here now. When you mentioned Newgrange in the book, you said that it was the palace on the Boyne. But Boyne is a further translation of white cow. And the white cow was revered, white cow was revered as the horned animal. And there's evidence that some of their rock art is symbolic with the Dogon's rock art. We're talking spirals, we're talking sun wheels, we're talking waves, like a symbol of a wave drawing underneath each other 3 times. Something like a leaf that was curled to one side with all its veins drawing on it as well. Like, similar rock art. And again, they also have a weird thing. I'll send you a picture, Rita. It's actually of the oldest humanoid. Now, I say humanoid specifically. The oldest humanoid face in Europe. They say human face, but I say humanoid because it looks like a narrow chin with diamond eyes, almost like an alien grey type, modern alien grey. And it's drawn in rock art at a passage grave that's typically 3000 BC. And it's the oldest humanoid face in the whole of Europe at rock art, like. And it's at a passage grave again, like, and we keep going back to these Dogon, but, Newgrange, as you mentioned in the book, that typically 3200 BC, is in the shape of a womb. It's got these weird fertility, elements to it. And you talk about fertility gods and the water element. It's on the edge of the Boyne. It's got, it's known as the place of the white cow is its full translation, like. And again, you have curbstones shaped into like a cow's head with horns, horned features on it, like, So I guess the thing to say is that going back to a serpent horned element across these different cultures is something that is opening up for research, like.
Well, actually, I've started researching another book, and one of the elements that I wanted to look into was the concept of the sacred cow. Because for some reason, which is not necessarily tied to the serpent, for some reason, there is this cow thrown into the middle of it. I mean, if you look at Norse mythology, you had Ymir, he appears first, and then as the ice melts, a cow shows up. What's with that? And then like in India, the cows are venerated. Australia, they use, I think it's Australia, when they would do a sacrifice, they would use the fat off of the kidneys of the cows. Well, I think in Jewish ritual sacrifice, when the temple was still there and they were doing the rituals, that they used the fat off the organ meat to sacrifice to the gods. So again, there are these cows, why not a squirrel? I mean, that's, people go, well, it's just a coincidence. It's like, well, I'm sorry. Why can't it be a squirrel? Why can't it be something else? Why does everybody have the same thing?
I think they revered, and this is what I said to you about Shannon Doherty and her work on the Dogon. And Shannon has endorsed my book, and gracefully so. And it was nice to see that another Dogon author will me on to do more research. And she's gone into a lot of the Dogon mythology and very in depth now, and a lot of it. I guess it would be a lot of the genetic manipulation and stuff like that. But she reveres that the Nummo had horned nodules. That's what the Dogon described them as, having horned, not big giant horns coming out of their head, but they had horned nodules on their bumps on their skull. And maybe that's why they revered the cow, as a deity, because of this horned feature that this mimicked their gods that they worshipped. These gods being with a small g.
Yeah.
I
don't know.
Yeah, it's just another area. It's one that's kind of I see more evidence in because I've researched that specific area, But I just think back of Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods documentary from the 1970. I think it was first out, the very original one. He had another rock art in top of Africa that had this weird horned creature. I don't know if you remember that, Rita. Do you remember that?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head, but I'm sure if I saw the picture, I'd go, oh yeah, I know that.
Yeah. It's, I just remember.
I got to meet him in last October.
Did you?
I did.
Tell me about that. Cool. Tell me about that.
I was, spoke at the Paradigm Symposium. And so he was obviously the keynote person, but it was a really freaking cool event because Giorgio Tsoukalos was there, and the now late, God bless his soul, Philip Coppens was there, and Eric von Daniken, and Laird Scranton was there, Nick Redfern was there. I mean, it was like a who's who of anybody being anybody there. I had so much fun. Can I tell you the best part?
Yeah, go for it.
So
you got me. I'm intrigued. This is the who's who.
So the best part, this is my little dirt. So the best part, Giorgio Tsoukalos had done his presentation, so he had this little table set up, and he, was selling some jewelry with, the little airplane sculpture things that he has, the pin that he wears on the TV show. Well, he had little earrings of those, so of course I had to buy a pair. Yeah, of course. And so he was autographing book pictures and, autographing stuff. So, I got my earrings. Oh, he was great. And I get in line and I get up to the front and, he was wants my stuff. And I'm like, hi, Giorgio, I'm Rita Louise from Just Energy Radio. And he puts his pen down, comes around the table, gives me this huge hug. And he was like, oh, it was so nice. It was great. And just in case people are wondering, he's not short. I thought, he would be, not really tall.
He's got such a big smile. He can't stop smiling. He loves it. He's so passionate about life. He can't contain it. It's just emanating from him, So.
No, he was a very cool guy, very genuine soul.
Yeah.
Genuine soul.
Yeah. And he's got that legendary Times magazine as well, which I've had a few articles and I like Giorgio. I definitely do. Yeah, he's brought a lot to the table. As you mentioned, Philip Coppens. I actually had researched a lot. I'm so sad to hear about Philip Coppens. And a lot of respect for him as a researcher. He done a lot on megaliths too, Rita, over this part of the world, and he'd lived in Scotland. But such a sad story and such a loss. He checked out early on us. Yeah,
it was just shocking because we had just seen him in October and he looked fine.
That's right. And I think he was on Randy's show, and it wasn't long after that it was literally, he's just gone so quick, and these things happen, you get your calling in this life and you're gone, and that's it, and but he's left a legacy behind, and a legacy for research and an inspiration too, and that's a good thing, Rita, we're at the top of the hour, second hour, I should say. I've gone to 2 hours on my shows now. I just think it's one long 1 hour. But so give us out your websites again, and just remind the listeners of your forthcoming tour and anything else you want to just relate to us before you go.
Okay. So my primary website is www.soulhealer.com. That's SOULHEALER.com, soulhealer.com. And from there, you can, purchase my new book, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. But I have 3 other books there as well, that 2 of them talk about health and healing, and one is a ghost book called Dark Angels. And I write a lot of articles, so there's a ton of articles. My new thing is making YouTube videos, like little video learning things. So that's on there. You can access the radio show, and at the top of the page, there's a giant banner that takes you to get information about the upcoming tour to Peru. So if you're interested, do contact us to reserve a spot.
Sure. Awesome. And I've got you linked up on my own YouTube channel if people want to find us there. That's James Swagger, DOTCOM, jamesswagger.com, spelt all out. So, I've got your 2 YouTube channels linked up there, Rita, as well. And your Peru tour is on the CapricornRadio.com homepage for the listeners that want to find out. I really look forward to what's going to happen with that tour. You got me attention on the interactive learning there, Rita. You're such an interesting person. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show, Rita. It really has been
Well, I can't wait to have you on so I can find out all your information in
you've actually. Yeah, that's awesome. May 2nd for that, yeah. That's going to be interesting because you've had the benefit of me doing quite a few shows, and I've actually got a new book coming out this summer, so we're going to probably get it. You're going to hopefully get, I don't know if I can get you the book by then, but you're going to get a certain lot of information released firsthand that before.
Well, I don't know. Maybe we should do a show on the first book and then just have you come back.
Yeah, the funny thing is, I was aware of the research for my second book when I done the first, and I laboriously did a lot of research alongside it on acoustics, and I thought I was just going insane. I was like, I'm never going to use this. It's going to sit on my desk. It turned out to be more interesting, and again with Gary Evans and that, having a chat with him and and his acoustics element. He's done it from an experiential type of view. I'm doing it from a scientific point of view, but there's so many mysteries out there, Rita. I think that's the thing.
There's enough for everybody.
And there's not enough people out there doing it. There isn't, we need, look at Lars Skranson. I always refer to him, he's a computer programmer, but he's studying the symbolic language of computers, but he's also studying the symbolic language of the Dogon and relating it to Egypt, and sometimes you get these people from outside the field have the skill set needed to address the situation, and there's not enough people from different fields. It's a multidisciplinary scientific field out there these days, so. Well, that's that, Rita, and it's been a pleasure having you on the show. You're going to come back sometime anyway, later on in the year, I hope, yeah?
Okay, you just, drop me an email and you got me.
Awesome. Right, well, that's a pleasure. That's a wrap, as they say. So, again, thank you for having me on the show, Rita.
All right, thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye now. There you go, guys. That was Dr. Rita Louise. Such an interesting, multi-dimensional persona. I've really come away today with knowledge embedded through someone else's perspective. That's my favourite kind of learning. I recommend you check out Dr. Rita's book, and if you got time, check out her website. She's got lots of interesting articles there. And a lot of our shows are archived there as well. That's soulhealer.com. I think it's got everything linked up there. That's all for now, folks. I've got Santos Bonacci this Friday, March 15th, and Maurice Cotterell, an Easter special on the Holy Grail, and Stephen Mailer, an independent Egyptologist, at the end of March. For now, stay tuned to your host, E.A. James Swagger, on Capricorn Radio, and don't forget to subscribe, folks.